What if the greatest disasters in human history weren't just witnessed by the people who lived through them? What if there were others standing in the crowd, people who didn't belong, who had no business being there, watching events unfold with the calm detachment of someone who already knew exactly what was about to happen? Today, we're revealing 10 documented cases of alleged time travelers who appeared at history's darkest moments. And what they reveal will shake everything you believe. Number 10. The photographer at Pompeii. This case is one of the most mysterious archaeological discoveries of the 21st century. And once you hear it, you'll understand why researchers are still debating what it means. Imagine you're an archaeologist in the summer of 2018, carefully brushing centuries of volcanic ash from a sealed chamber that hasn't been opened since the day Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii in 79 AD. You've spent your entire career hoping for a discovery like this, and then you find something that makes your blood run cold. A skeleton clutching an object that simply shouldn't exist. The discovery was made near the city's eastern gate, in a villa that had somehow escaped excavation for nearly 2,000 years. The chamber was small, almost like a closet, sealed shut by layers of pumice and ash. When the team finally broke through, they found a single human skeleton positioned against the far wall. But here's what made everyone freeze. The skeleton wasn't huddled in fear like most Pompeii victims. It was sitting upright, facing the direction of the volcano, as if watching the eruption rather than fleeing from it. In the skeleton's right hand was a small metallic disc, roughly the size of a modern coin but thicker, heavier. The surface was covered in geometric etchings so precise, so mathematically perfect, that the lead archaeologist reportedly said no Roman craftsman could have made this. No craftsman from any ancient civilization could have made this. But the disc was only the beginning. When researchers examined the skeleton more closely, they discovered something even more disturbing. The teeth showed evidence of dental work, fillings, and repairs, using techniques and materials that wouldn't be developed until the late 20th century. Carbon dating produced contradictory results. Some tests placed the bones at nearly 2,000 years old, consistent with the Pompeii disaster. Other tests returned readings that made no sense at all, as if the bones existed outside of normal time. And then an old journal surfaced. A British archaeologist working in Pompeii in 1892 had written about finding a similar disc in a different location, decades before this discovery. He described the figure he found as a watcher, not a victim, and wrote that the disc hummed faintly when held to the light. His colleagues dismissed him as delusional. His findings were never published. The disc he found was never seen again. So, what exactly is this object? Some researchers believe it might be evidence of what they call disaster tourism, the theory that future civilizations may have developed the technology to send observers back to witness pivotal historical events. Perhaps catastrophes like Pompeii are treated as educational experiences, data collection missions, or something even stranger. The volcano that buried an entire city in a single day would certainly be worth witnessing if you already knew you would survive. But here's where the case takes its most chilling turn. When the metallic disc was examined under specific light frequencies in a laboratory in Rome, something impossible happened. The etchings on the surface seemed to shift, to move. For a few brief seconds, researchers reported seeing what appeared to be images, fleeting glimpses of the eruption from multiple angles, as if someone had recorded it. The footage was confiscated before it could be analyzed further. The researchers involved were reassigned to different projects. And 3 weeks later, the disc itself vanished from the facility. No security footage captured its removal. No alarms were triggered. It was simply gone, as if it had never existed at all. Some investigators believe it was taken by government agents who understood its significance. Others have a different theory. They believe the disc was never meant to be found in the first place, and that someone came back to retrieve it. Who was this mysterious figure sitting in the darkness of Pompeii, watching a volcano destroy everything in its path? Why were they carrying technology that wouldn't exist for another 2,000 years? And perhaps most importantly, where is that disc now? And what else did it record? The answers remain buried, perhaps deeper than we can ever dig. But witnessing destruction from a safe distance is one thing. The next case involves someone who tried to stop a disaster and may have caused something far worse. Number 9, the warning at Galveston. This case is absolutely heartbreaking, and what makes it so haunting is that thousands of lives could have been saved if only someone had listened. Imagine you're living in Galveston, Texas, in September of 1900. The city is thriving, prosperous, full of life. The beaches are beautiful, the port is busy, And nobody, absolutely nobody, believes that anything bad could ever happen here. And then a stranger arrives with a warning so specific, so desperate, that it sounds like the ravings of a madman. 3 days later, over 8,000 people are dead. It was the deadliest natural disaster in American history. And according to accounts that have been passed down through generations, someone tried to stop it. On September 5th, 1900, a disheveled man walked into the Galveston telegraph office. His clothes were strange, slightly too fitted, made of a fabric the clerk didn't recognize. His accent was impossible to place, not northern, not southern, not European, something else entirely. He was trembling, agitated, and he begged the operator to send urgent messages to newspapers across the country. He said a massive hurricane would strike Galveston on September 8th. He said the storm surge would reach over 15 feet. He said the entire island would be submerged and thousands would drown. The telegraph operator thought he was dealing with a lunatic. He refused to send the messages and asked the man to leave. But the stranger didn't leave. He went into the streets, stopping people, grabbing their arms, pleading with them to evacuate. Most ignored him. Some laughed. A few threatened to call the police. But here's where the story becomes truly chilling. According to witness accounts collected years later, the stranger showed people a photograph. Not a drawing, not a painting, but an actual photograph of the aftermath. It showed streets filled with bodies, buildings reduced to splinters, debris stretching to the horizon. One witness, an elderly woman interviewed in 1932, said the image was impossibly clear, like looking through a window at something that hadn't happened yet. She said she could see the faces of the dead. She said some of them looked familiar. Nobody believed him. How could they? The weather was beautiful. The sky was blue. There was no way to accept that everything they knew was about to be destroyed. The stranger eventually stopped pleading. Witnesses said he sat on a bench near the harbor, staring at the water, weeping silently. On September 8th, the hurricane made landfall exactly as he predicted. The storm surge reached 16 feet. Entire neighborhoods were swept into the sea. Bodies washed up on the mainland for weeks. It was devastation beyond anything America had ever seen. But the stranger's story doesn't end there, because survivors reported seeing him during the storm itself. A man matching his description was spotted standing on the roof of a collapsing building as the winds tore the city apart. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't trying to escape. He was watching, witnesses said, with the saddest expression they had ever seen on a human face. And then the building fell, and he was gone. Researchers who study this case speak of something called the Cassandra paradox. The idea is simple and tragic. If a time traveler tries to warn people about a disaster, their very precision becomes their undoing. The warning sounds too detailed, too specific, too impossible to believe. The more accurate the prediction, the less likely anyone is to take it seriously. The stranger at Galveston knew exactly what would happen because he had already seen it. And that knowledge made him unbelievable. His body was never found among the dead. No records of his arrival in Galveston exist. But a letter written by a survivor in 1903 mentions something extraordinary. The survivor claimed to have seen the same man in New Orleans 3 years after the storm. He was still carrying the photograph. Only now, the survivor said, photographs showed a different city in ruins. Who was this man? How did he know what was coming? And how many disasters has he watched? Helpless, unable to change what he already knows will happen. A failed warning is tragic. But what happens when a time traveler's interference actually works, and the consequences ripple outward in ways no one anticipated? Number 8, the surgeon on the Titanic. This case is one of the most fascinating mysteries connected to the most famous shipwreck in history. And what you're about to hear raises questions that have never been answered. Among the 710 survivors of the Titanic, there was one passenger whose name appeared on no manifest, whose ticket was never purchased, and whose medical interventions that night saved at least 40 lives using techniques that wouldn't be invented for another 50 years. Imagine you're on the deck of a sinking ship in the freezing darkness of the North Atlantic. Chaos surrounds you. People are screaming, praying, dying. And then a stranger appears who seems to know exactly what to do, exactly where to go, exactly who to save. April 15th, 1912. The Titanic was sinking, and 1,500 people were about to die. In the pandemonium of those final hours, survivors later described a figure who moved through the flooding lower decks with an almost supernatural calm. He didn't panic, he didn't hesitate. He directed passengers to specific lifeboats, telling them which ones would launch successfully and which ones would be swamped. He knew things he couldn't possibly have known, but it was his medical skills that truly set him apart. Survivor testimonies describe this unnamed man performing emergency procedures on injured passengers, techniques involving pressure points, body positioning, and wound treatment that weren't taught in any medical school of that era. One survivor, a woman who had been crushed by falling debris, later told investigators that the stranger had kept her alive through methods she couldn't describe but had never seen before. Doctors who examined her injuries said she should have died within minutes. She lived another 47 years. The man never gave his name. When passengers asked who he was, he reportedly smiled and said only, "Someone who wanted to help." He worked tirelessly through the night, moving between lifeboats, treating hypothermia victims with techniques that modern medicine would only develop decades later. And then, as dawn approached and the rescue ship Carpathia arrived, he simply vanished. No one saw him board the Carpathia. No one saw him among the survivors. No one ever saw him again. But here's where the mystery deepens. A photograph taken by a passenger in one of the lifeboats shows the Titanic in its final moments, tilting into the black water. In the corner of the image, partially obscured by shadow, stands a figure whose clothing appears oddly modern. The jacket is fitted in a way that doesn't match 1912 fashion. The fabric has a strange sheen. His face is blurred, as if he moved during the exposure. But the exposure time was nearly 3 seconds. No human moves that consistently for 3 seconds, unless they're deliberately trying to obscure themselves. And then researchers discovered something that transforms this mystery into something far more unsettling. 3 of the passengers saved by this mysterious surgeon went on to have descendants who would become instrumental in key 20th century developments. One woman's grandson worked on the Manhattan Project. Another survivor's daughter became a founding engineer at NASA. A third man's great-granddaughter would later help develop early internet protocols. Coincidence or calculated intervention? Some theorists speak of something called lineage protection, the idea that time travelers might intervene in disasters, not to save masses of people, but to ensure specific genetic lines survive. If someone from the future knew which bloodlines would become essential for human progress, they might risk everything to keep those particular people alive. 40 lives saved out of 1,500, not random, chosen. In 1985, when the Titanic wreck was finally discovered at the bottom of the Atlantic, researchers found something inexplicable in the debris field. A sealed titanium container, too corroded to open, bearing no markings that matched any 1912 manufacturer. The container was retrieved but never publicly analyzed. It remains in a private collection, its contents unknown. What was in that container? Who was the surgeon who saved 40 lives and then disappeared into history? And perhaps most importantly, whose bloodline was he really there to protect? Saving lives sounds noble, but the next case reveals what happens when a time traveler arrives not to save, but to witness humanity at its absolute worst. Number 7. The silent observer at Hiroshima. This case is deeply unsettling, and what makes it so disturbing is not just what was witnessed, but the possibility of why someone would choose to witness it at all. Imagine you're standing on a quiet street in Hiroshima on the morning of August 6th, 1945. The sun is rising. Children are walking to school. People are beginning their day, completely unaware that in just a few moments, the world will change forever. And standing among them, perfectly still, is a man who doesn't belong. A man who is staring at the sky as if waiting for something only he knows is coming. At 8:15 in the morning, the atomic bomb detonated over the city. 80,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would die in the weeks and months that followed. It remains one of the most devastating moments in human history. But according to survivor testimonies that were largely ignored for decades, someone was there who seemed to know exactly what was about to happen. Kenji Yamamoto was a school teacher who survived the blast. In 1978, he gave a detailed account that researchers dismissed at the time, but have since reconsidered. He described the moments before the explosion with haunting clarity. The air raid sirens had fallen silent. People assumed the danger had passed, but Yamamoto noticed something strange. A Western man was standing in the middle of the street, completely motionless, staring directly at the sky. He made no attempt to seek shelter. He showed no fear. He was holding something to his eye, something small and rectangular, like a box with a glass front. Yamamoto wasn't the only one who saw him. When researchers cross-referenced his testimony with other survivor accounts, they found impossible consistencies. Multiple witnesses described the same figure, tall, wearing unusual gray clothing, standing in the open with his face tilted upward. Several noted the object he was holding. None of them had ever seen anything like it. One survivor said it reminded her of a tiny telescope. Another described it as a small machine that seemed to be pointed at the sky. And then the bomb fell. The flash, the heat, the shockwave that leveled everything in its path. Yamamoto was thrown into a ditch and survived only because a concrete wall shielded him from the initial blast. When he emerged 45 minutes later, the city was burning. Bodies lay everywhere. The air was thick with ash and screams. And through the smoke, he saw something he would never forget. A silhouette was walking through the fires, moving calmly in the opposite direction of everyone else. The figure's outline was intact, undamaged. While survivors stumbled past in tattered, burning clothing, this figure appeared untouched, as if the destruction simply couldn't reach him. Yamamoto watched until the smoke swallowed the figure completely. He never saw the man again. For decades, Yamamoto's account was considered trauma-induced hallucination. But in 2003, a dying American physicist made a confession to a colleague that changed everything. He claimed that in 1962, he had been briefed on a classified military project exploring what he called temporal observation. The project's purpose was to send observers back to key historical moments to collect data. He claimed Hiroshima and Nagasaki were priority targets because understanding nuclear devastation from the ground level was considered essential for future defense planning. He named no sources. He provided no documents. He died 3 days later. Some researchers now speak of something called non-interference protocols, the chilling possibility that time travelers may operate under strict rules that forbid intervention. They can watch, they can record, but they cannot act, even as thousands die around them. The ethics of such observation are horrifying to contemplate. In 2018, a private collector in Osaka acquired what appeared to be an old camera from the Hiroshima period. When experts examined it, they discovered internal components made of materials that didn't exist in 1945 or in 2019. The collector refused all further inquiries. The camera remains locked away, its contents unknown. Who was the man in the gray clothing? What was he recording? And who, even now, might be watching our darkest moments unfold? Observation without intervention is chilling enough. But the next case involves something far more disturbing. A time traveler who arrived at a disaster that hadn't happened yet. Number 6, the prophet of the San Francisco earthquake. This case is absolutely extraordinary, and what makes it so haunting is that the warning was given, the evidence was presented, and still, nobody believed. Imagine you're working at a newspaper office in San Francisco in October of 1905. The city is booming, beautiful, full of promise. And then a woman walks through your door carrying documents that describe, in precise detail, the complete destruction of everything you know. She tells you it will happen in 6 months. She tells you exactly when, exactly where, exactly how, and you laugh her out of the building. 6 months later, over 3,000 people are dead. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake remains one of the most devastating disasters in American history. The quake itself lasted less than a minute, but the fires that followed burned for 3 days, destroying over 80% of the city. And according to a journal that survived the destruction, someone tried to warn them. Her name was Helena. At least, that's what she called herself. In October of 1905, she walked into the offices of the San Francisco Examiner carrying a leather satchel filled with documents. She asked to speak with the editor. She said she had information that would save thousands of lives. When she was finally granted an audience, she spread her documents across the desk. Maps of the city marked with red ink. Lists of buildings that would collapse, streets that would burn, areas that would remain untouched. She told them the earthquake would strike at 5:12 in the morning on April 18th. She said it would last approximately 45 seconds. She said the fires afterward would cause more damage than the quake itself. The editor thought she was insane. He had her escorted from the building, but a junior reporter, intrigued by her intensity, followed her outside. He recorded their conversation in a personal journal that would survive the earthquake and remain hidden in his family's possession until 1987. Helena told the young reporter that she had seen the earthquake happen. When he asked how, she said only, "I was there. I watched it all." When he pressed further, asking where she came from, she gave an answer that made no sense at the time. "Farther than you could walk in 100 lifetimes," she said. "Farther than you could sail in 1,000. She wasn't speaking in metaphors. She was speaking with the calm certainty of someone stating simple fact. The reporter made a sketch of Helena's clothing in his journal. The garment was form-fitting, with no visible seams. No buttons, no laces. On her collar were small symbols he couldn't identify. He copied them as carefully as he could. When modern analysts examined the journal in the 1990s, they noticed something remarkable. The symbols bore a striking resemblance to quantum physics notation that wouldn't be developed until the 1970s. Some researchers speak of something called the compulsion theory. The idea is that if time travel exists, certain individuals may be psychologically unable to resist visiting specific historical moments, even when doing so serves no purpose, even when they know they cannot change what will happen. Perhaps Helena was drawn to San Francisco, not because she thought she could save anyone, but because she simply couldn't stay away. The earthquake struck exactly as she predicted. At 5:12 in the morning, on April 18, 1906, the ground shook for 42 seconds, and the city began to die. After the disaster, the young reporter searched for Helena among the refugees and the dead. He never found her. He spent years looking, following every rumor, chasing every lead. He found nothing. But in his final journal entry, written shortly before his own death in 1952, he describes something that still sends chills down the spines of researchers who study this case. He wrote that he saw Helena once more. It was 1945, in a newsreel about the bombing of Dresden. There she was, standing in the rubble, same face, same age, same sad eyes. 40 years had passed. She hadn't aged a day. A woman who appeared at multiple disasters across decades, never aging, always watching. That alone would be extraordinary. But the next case involves an entire group of witnesses, and the horrifying suggestion that disaster tourism might be organized. Number 5. The audience at the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. This case is deeply disturbing, and what makes it so horrifying is not just the tragedy itself, but the suggestion that someone came to watch it happen. Imagine you're standing on a crowded street in New York City on March 25, 1911. You look up and see smoke pouring from the upper floors of a 10-story building. You see young women, some of them barely teenagers, appearing at the windows. And then they start to jump. One after another, they fall to the pavement around you. People are screaming, weeping, collapsing in shock. But standing apart from the crowd, watching with calm detachment, is a group of well-dressed strangers who show no emotion at all. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire killed 146 garment workers, most of them young immigrant women. The exits had been locked to prevent theft. The fire escapes collapsed under the weight of fleeing workers. It remains one of the deadliest industrial disasters in American history and became a pivotal moment in the fight for workers' rights. But according to police reports from that day, something else was happening on the street below, something that witnesses struggled to explain. Multiple witness statements describe a group of 8 to 10 people standing apart from the horrified crowd. They were finely dressed, expensively clothed, in a style that seemed slightly off, not quite matching the fashions of 1911. They didn't scream, they didn't cry, they didn't look away as bodies struck the pavement. One witness, a factory worker who had escaped down the stairs, said they observed as one might observe animals at a zoo. Another witness said several of them were holding small silver devices to their faces, almost like they were looking through them. A photograph taken by a press photographer that day shows the burning building with crowds gathered below. In the corner of the image, partially obscured by smoke and chaos, stands a group matching the witness descriptions. One figure appears to be holding something to his face, something small and reflective. The resolution isn't clear enough to identify the object with certainty, but the image has been analyzed dozens of times, and no one has ever been able to explain who these people were or why they appeared so unnaturally calm. And then there's the detail that transforms this mystery into something far more sinister. A descendant of one of the victims, researching her family history in 2015, discovered something in her great-grandmother's letters. The day before the fire, a strange woman had approached workers at the factory. She asked detailed questions about the building layout, the locked doors, the number of workers on each floor, the location of the fire escapes. She claimed to be a safety inspector. No official inspection was ever recorded. No one matching her description worked for any safety organization in New York. Was she gathering information, confirming details, making sure everything would happen exactly as expected? Some researchers speak of something called event tourism, the organized visitation of historical tragedies as educational experiences, cultural events, or something even darker. The idea that future civilizations might treat human suffering as spectacle is almost too horrifying to contemplate. But if time travel exists, and if certain moments are considered historically significant, then disasters like the Triangle Fire would surely attract observers. 146 deaths that changed labor laws forever, a turning point in American history. Worth witnessing, perhaps, for those who already know how it ends. In 2011, on the 100th anniversary of the fire, a memorial event was held at the site of the tragedy. Survivors' descendants gathered to honor the dead, but the ceremony was disrupted when a woman in the crowd suddenly began screaming. She pointed at a group of well-dressed attendees standing apart from the others. "They're back!" she shouted. "The Watchers are back!" Security footage from that day showed no unusual individuals, but the woman, a great-granddaughter of a survivor, swore until her death that she recognized the faces from her grandmother's descriptions, the same faces, the same calm expressions. 100 years later, groups of watchers observing tragedy. The implications are staggering. But the next case takes this concept to its most extreme conclusion, a time traveler who claims to have witnessed not one disaster, but dozens. Number 4, the chronicler of catastrophe. This case is one of the most disturbing accounts of time travel ever recorded. And what makes it so unsettling is not just the man's claims, but the evidence he left behind. Imagine you're a police officer in Chicago in '97. A homeless man is brought in for trespassing at a construction site. He's disheveled, exhausted, and clearly troubled. But in his possession is a journal that will haunt you for the rest of your life. A journal containing eyewitness accounts of 37 disasters, some from the distant past, and some that haven't happened yet. The man identified himself as Martin Cole. When officers asked his age, he said 186 years old. They assumed mental illness, perhaps schizophrenia, perhaps delusion brought on by years of hardship. But then a detective began reading the journal, and everything changed. The entries were written in neat, precise handwriting that never wavered across hundreds of pages. Each disaster was documented with the calm detachment of a professional observer. Dates, times, locations, death tolls, specific details that no casual reader of history would know. The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915. The Hindenburg explosion in 1937. The bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. Each account read like the testimony of someone who had been there, standing in the crowd, watching it unfold. But here's what made the detective's hands tremble. Cole's entry about the 1986 Chernobyl disaster described the exact sequence of operator errors that caused the reactor to explode. He used technical terminology that matched classified Soviet reports that wouldn't be declassified until 2006. There was no way he could have known those details. No book contained them. No documentary had revealed them. And yet there they were, written in a journal dated '97. His entry about the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake included seismological measurements with precision that predated modern detection equipment. He described the exact moment the Cypress Street viaduct collapsed, the exact number of cars trapped beneath it, details that investigators themselves didn't confirm until weeks after the disaster. And then there were the future entries. Disasters described in the same meticulous detail waiting to happen. A volcanic eruption in Indonesia in 2029, a bridge collapse in South America in 2041, a catastrophic event Cole called the Great Fire in the Sky in 2034. About that entry, he wrote only one personal note. "This is the one I could not watch again." When interrogated, Cole's story was consistent and chilling. He claimed he was not a traveler by choice, but a prisoner. He said he had once attempted to prevent a disaster, to save lives, to change what he knew would happen. For that crime, he was caught, and his punishment was eternal witness. "They make me watch," he said in his only recorded interview. His voice was flat, exhausted, emptied of hope. "Every time humanity fails itself, I am there. I see the fires, I hear the screams, I watch the bodies fall, and I am not allowed to look away. I am not allowed to forget. This is my sentence. This is my hell." Some researchers theorize that future justice systems might use forced witnessing of historical atrocities as a form of punishment or rehabilitation. The idea is almost too cruel to imagine. To stand helpless at the sight of every tragedy, knowing what will happen, forbidden to intervene, condemned to carry the memory forever. Cole disappeared from police custody before his psychological evaluation could be completed. The holding cell was locked. The surveillance camera showed nothing unusual. One moment he was there, the next moment he was gone. The journal remained behind, filed as evidence, and later transferred to a university archive. Researchers continue to cross-reference Cole's future entries with current events. 3 of his predictions have already come true, exactly as he described. The dates matched, the locations matched, the death tolls matched. How many more are waiting in those pages? And somewhere out there, is Martin Cole watching right now, condemned to witness another tragedy he cannot stop? A man sentenced to watch disasters for eternity. The cruelty is almost unbearable. But the next case suggests something even more disturbing, that some disasters might not just be witnessed by time travelers, but caused by them. Number 3, the saboteur on the Hindenburg. This case challenges everything you think you know about one of history's most iconic disasters. And what makes it so disturbing is the possibility that the explosion wasn't an accident at all. Imagine you're standing at Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey on May 6, 1937. The great airship Hindenburg is descending through a stormy sky, its silver skin gleaming in the fading light. Passengers are waving from the windows. Ground crews are preparing to secure the mooring lines. And somewhere aboard that magnificent vessel, someone is counting down the seconds until everything burns. Not because they want to destroy, but because they believe they have no other choice. For decades, the cause of the Hindenburg disaster remained officially unexplained. 36 people died in the inferno that consumed the airship in just 37 seconds. Theories range from static electricity to sabotage to structural failure, but none were ever proven conclusively. The mystery endured. And then, in 2018, a confession surfaced that changed everything. A private collection of documents from a deceased German engineer contained a sealed letter dated 1962. The letter had been authenticated by multiple experts before its contents were revealed. Inside was a confession from a man claiming to have been a crew member aboard the Hindenburg, a man whose name appeared on no official roster. The confession described the disaster not as an act of destruction, but as an act of desperation. The writer claimed he had been sent back in time to ensure the Hindenburg failed, publicly and spectacularly, ending the age of airship travel before it could progress to something far worse. If the great ships had continued, he wrote, the war that followed would have burned every city in Europe from the sky. According to the letter, the writer came from a future where rigid airships had evolved into massive military platforms, silent, nearly invisible to radar, capable of carrying payloads that made conventional bombers obsolete. In that timeline, World War II wasn't fought with tanks and infantry. It was fought with fleets of hydrogen giants that rained fire on civilian populations. London, Paris, Moscow, Berlin, all reduced to ash by weapons that floated silently overhead. The Hindenburg had to fail. The world had to see it burn. The horror of that single disaster would turn public opinion against airships forever, steering technological development toward airplanes instead. 36 deaths in 1937 to prevent millions in an alternate 1940s. The mathematics of tragedy, the calculus of prevention. The letter included technical specifications for an incendiary device that matched known 1930s technology. The components described bore striking resemblance to prototypes developed in the 1980s. Thermite-based ignition, delayed trigger mechanisms, materials that would leave no traceable residue after combustion. Whoever wrote this letter either had access to future technology or possessed knowledge decades ahead of their time. The engineer who possessed the letter spent 40 years trying to identify the mysterious crew member. He searched German archives, American immigration records, Zeppelin Company files. He found nothing. No birth certificate, no employment history, no death record. The man simply didn't exist, at least not in any documentation from that era. But he did find one thing: a photograph of the Hindenburg crew taken days before the fatal voyage. In the back row, partially obscured by other crew members, stands a figure whose face appears strangely blurred. Every other face in the photograph is sharp, clear, recognizable. But this man's features seem somehow resistant to the camera, as if he existed slightly out of phase with the moment being captured. Some theorists call this preventive catastrophe, the idea that time travelers might engineer smaller disasters to prevent larger ones. It requires impossible ethical calculations. How many deaths are acceptable to save more lives? Who decides which timeline is worth preserving? And what happens to the souls sacrificed for a future they'll never see? The letter ends with a single haunting sentence. I watched them burn, and I told myself it was mercy. I still tell myself that every night before I close my eyes, causing disaster to prevent worse disaster. The moral mathematics are staggering, but the next case leaves ethics behind entirely because it involves a traveler who came not to prevent or observe, but to escape. Number 2, the refugee from Chernobyl's future. This case is absolutely chilling. And what makes it so terrifying is that the evidence was documented in official Soviet medical records that weren't declassified until 2016. Imagine you're a doctor in a Kyiv hospital on April 25th, 1986. A young woman is brought in from near the city of Pripyat. She's confused, disoriented, and suffering from severe radiation sickness. Her skin is blistered, her hair is falling out, her white blood cell count is collapsing. But here's the problem. There's been no radiation leak. The nearest nuclear facility has reported no incidents. The Chernobyl reactor won't explode for another 24 hours. So, how is this woman dying from radiation that hasn't been released yet? The medical records describe her as a female patient, approximately 25 years old, admitted on the evening of April 25th, 1986. Her symptoms were unmistakable to anyone trained in nuclear medicine. Acute radiation syndrome, severe exposure, the kind of cellular damage that only occurs when someone is caught in the immediate vicinity of a major nuclear event. But no such event had occurred, not yet. The doctors were baffled. They treated her symptoms as best they could, but her condition deteriorated rapidly. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes delirious. And when she spoke, she said things that made no sense. Things that would only make sense the following day, when reactor number 4 tore itself apart and poisoned the sky over Ukraine. According to the records, the woman spoke fluent Russian, but with an accent that the medical staff couldn't place. It wasn't Ukrainian, it wasn't Belarusian, it was something else entirely, familiar but somehow wrong, as if the language had evolved in ways they couldn't recognize. She used words that didn't exist, technical terms that wouldn't enter the vocabulary until years later. When asked where she came from, she reportedly gave an answer that no one understood at the time. "I came from after," she said. "I thought I could outrun it." When the Chernobyl reactor exploded on April 26th, the doctors realized with horror that her symptoms exactly matched what they would soon see in thousands of victims. She had been exposed before the explosion. She had experienced Chernobyl before it happened. Some of the medical staff began whispering that she had somehow lived through the disaster already, that she had come from a time after the reactor had failed. In her delirium, she described things that made the doctors' blood run cold. She spoke of Chernobyl not as an isolated accident, but as the beginning of something far worse. She described a second fire in Tunai 47, a larger disaster that would make the 1986 explosion look like a candle in comparison. She spoke of a future where the entire exclusion zone had become something she called the dead earth, a place where nothing lived, where the ground itself was poison, where the sky glowed at night with a sickly green light. She said she had traveled back to escape. She thought she could outrun the radiation, outrun the future, find safety in an era before her world was destroyed. But the radiation had traveled with her. The poison in her cells had followed her through time. There was no escape. The woman died on April 28, 1986. 2 days after the explosion, she had already survived. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave outside Kyiv. No family claimed her. No records of her identity were ever found. But in 2018, Ukrainian researchers investigating anomalies in Chernobyl's history discovered something impossible. Her name appeared in a 2043 Soviet archive, a document that described her as a scientist who would be born in 2018, 3 years after she died. The same name, the same physical description, the same specialty in nuclear physics. A woman who died in 1986, listed as being born 33 years later. A refugee from a future that hasn't happened yet. A warning buried in the past. If this is true, then the next case becomes not just fascinating, but terrifying, because it suggests that the worst disaster in human history might still be ahead of us. Number 1, the witness to the final day. This case is the most disturbing account we've covered, and what makes it so terrifying is that if this man was telling the truth, then humanity's darkest hour isn't behind us. It's still ahead. Imagine you're a security officer at Geneva International Airport in 2008. A man approaches passport control with no identification, no documents, no explanation for how he entered the terminal. His clothing has no labels, no brand markings, made from a fabric you've never seen before. When you detain him for questioning, he looks at you with exhausted eyes and says something that will haunt you forever. "I've just witnessed the last day of human civilization. I'm trying to get home before it happens again." Swiss authorities held the man for 72 hours. He refused to give his name. He spoke fluent French, German, English, and Mandarin, switching between languages effortlessly, sometimes mid-sentence. During interrogation, the man remained calm, but clearly distressed. He described a future he called the collapse, a cascading series of disasters beginning in the 2040s that would reduce human population to less than 1 million within 3 decades. He spoke of rising seas that swallowed coastal cities, skies choked with ash from fires that burned for years, governments dissolving overnight as infrastructure failed, survivors clustering in scattered colonies, fighting over clean water and uncontaminated soil. He described it all with the weary precision of someone recounting memories, not predictions. When pressed for details about how he had traveled through time, he became agitated. He said he was part of something called a restoration project, an effort by future survivors to send observers back to key historical moments. The goal was to understand where humanity went wrong, to identify the decisions and events that led to the collapse. But something had malfunctioned during his return journey. "The window closed," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm stuck in the time before the end, and I've already seen what comes next." The device found in his pocket drew the attention of scientists from CERN, which happened to be nearby. Their informal analysis, leaked years later, described it as a navigation instrument of some kind, containing components that don't correspond to any known manufacturing process. After 72 hours, Swiss authorities had no legal grounds to hold him. He had committed no crime, he carried no weapons, he posed no identifiable threat. They released him with instructions to report to immigration services within 48 hours. He never appeared. Security footage from the day of his release shows him walking out of the airport terminal. He pauses at the exit, turns, and looks directly at a camera mounted high on the wall. For 3 long seconds, he stares into the lens. Lip readers have analyzed the footage dozens of times. They all agree on what he said. 4 words, mouthed slowly and deliberately. "You still have time." Then he walked through the doors and was never seen again. No passport control recorded his departure. No airline manifested his name. No taxi driver remembered his face. He simply vanished, as if he had never existed at all. Was he a messenger from a dying future? A survivor of a catastrophe that hasn't happened yet? Or something else entirely, a warning wrapped in human form, sent back to remind us that the end is not inevitable? We don't know. We may never know. But somewhere in the archives of Geneva Airport, that security footage still exists. A man looking into a camera, speaking 4 words that might be humanity's last chance. You still have time. The question is, how much? And what will we do with it? 10 travelers, 10 disasters, 10 impossible stories that refuse to be explained away. What if time isn't the straight line we've always believed? What if the future has already looked back at us and what it saw was too terrible to ignore? We ask ourselves what we would do if we could witness history's darkest moments. But perhaps the real question is this: what if someone already has, and they're still watching?